Okay, I'm going to start off by starting with a new model. Okay, this is an M17. Oop, I don't want that. And there's a couple of basic things that I want to do. Let me get this cord out of the way. Be a little wobbly here for a second. Okay. So I'm starting out with a new model. This is an M17. I've had requests to other radios, but this is the radio that I use. And I know this radio the best. So I'm going to start out with this one, and then once I get through all of this, and there's going to be a lot, once I get through all of it, then we can kind of relay some of it to the M12, and I think the next radio I'm going to do is a Spectrum. So I'm going to start out with a new model. So I went to model 9, and you should know too, when we look at these models, I'll go over to model, select. You can see I have a bunch of models saved in here. And one of the things that I do is, if I get a good setup, I'll save the model so that I don't lose my tune, because some of these ways to tune can get kind of complex with a lot of numbers, and I don't want to lose the tune. So if you get a good tune, to save that model or copy it to a new model is kind of how I remember all the good things that I have. So I have kind of a soft tune and a medium tune and a high traction tune based on the model. So first thing I'll do, this is again a brand new model. I haven't changed anything yet, so we'll go through all of it. And I can't really see the questions right now. I think Sarah, my girl, is gonna field some of the questions, and if they're applicable, I'll answer them on this video. If not, I'll answer them after the video. So first thing I'm gonna do is go to settings, and I'm gonna talk about the steering a little bit first. So on steering, I'll usually do this, and a good way to show it maybe is the setup of the car. Where's my car? I can show this real quick. So when you look at my car, my servo is exactly straight on the car. And when you have a servo that's exactly straight, then the throw on both left and right can be the same, and the radius will be the same. So you don't want a servo that's like this and the car goes straight. You want to try and get the exact straight arm so that the left and right can be the same number, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. But that's important. And the important part is, if you have a different mount, is that the arm coming off the servo is at a 90-degree angle. So if you have an arm coming off this way, this arm would be this way. Like if you have the servo up here and you had an arm like a bullet that's slightly angled, you want a 90-degree angle on that arm. For this, where everything's hooked on this, I just want it centered like this. So I'll show you why that's important. Okay, so when we go to the radio, I'm gonna go to the bass, and I only usually run about maybe 30%, and every car is gonna be different, but I'll lower this down left and right, but I can use the same number. So if I lower that down to like 30, and I lower this down to 35, it'll steer the same amount each way, and I'll get it pretty close to what I want with this left and right. And then when I go out to trim the car, I'll use this sub trim number and get the car going exactly straight. And it seems like there's a difference with sub trim compared to trim. I could be wrong, and all this stuff is based on what I know, so there could be some things that are slightly different, but I'm just telling you what I do. So I'll trim. If I have this a couple numbers one way or the other to get it to go exactly straight, I don't want that number to be too big. If the number's too big, then I'll reposition the servo. Once I get it to go straight, it should turn the same radius each way. Then I can go and control how much radius I want by going to dual rate. I don't want to control the majority of it with dual rate, but I can control a little bit. So if that radius is too much, it's steering too much, I'll turn this down to 90 maybe, right? I can adjust this down. So this is the overall percentage once you get the steering close. You don't want this dual rate at like 10 or 15%. It can do strange stuff. So I usually adjust the endpoints to pretty close to where I want. And then I'll do the fine tuning with the dual rate. Now, the other thing that I do with steering is I'll adjust the curve. And I don't think a lot of people know this one, but all the Street Outlaw cars are twitchy. And to get rid of some of that twitch, I will change the Expo and go to a -100. I do this on every drag car that I have. What this does, you can kind of see the line moving. It puts more of the steering throw towards the end of the throw. So when I steer, this first part of the steering doesn't have a lot of throw, but it still has all the throw that I need. It's just towards the end of the movement. So this kind of dulls your steering down a little bit, makes the car less twitchy. So that's about all I do with the steering. Make sure it has the same radius each side. I don't mess with the speed. The speed is 100%. I think if you slow the speed down, it slows your reaction time down. So I keep the speed at basically an instant speed. And I change the curve to a -100 curve to get rid of the twitchiness in the first part of the throw of the steering. Okay, so that's basically everything with the steering. This is where it's going to get fun. So I'm going to assign. I'm gonna fix or assign the buttons, right? So on the buttons, I'll use this one for the steering, but see how it moves 5 increments? It's a lot. I'm gonna change it to a finer adjustment. So I'm gonna go into the system, and I'm gonna go key assignment, and I'm gonna do 2 things. I want to assign, or I want to change the trim 4. So that's the steering trim right now, or I'm sorry, the trim 1. Sorry. So trim 1 right now, if you look at it, is set at 5 steps. I want to take that trim and move it to 1 step. So what that does is now when I trim, it only moves 1 step at a time. So you get a very fine adjustment on the steering. 5 is too much. It'll pull a little bit right. I trim it left, it'll pull a little bit left with 5. But with 1, very fine adjustment, you can get it to go exactly straight. So if we go back to the key assignment, I'm also going to assign, if I push this button, trim 4 is usually my shift button. So I'm going to assign that now to be able to shift. So if you scroll through, I'm going to assign R mode value to trim 4. And R mode is this button, right? So now it's not going to work yet. It's assigned to R mode, but I got to make R modes active. So I'm going to go through that now, and then just so the switch works, and I'll show you how to use that later in the video. So now trim 4 button is assigned to R mode. I'm going to go to R mode assignments under the system menu. So if I backed all the way out, I'm going to go to the system menu and go R mode. Okay, so it's off currently. I'm going to switch it over. I don't have any R modes active for steering. If you see the ST right there, that's usually what the first box means is steering, or you have different ranges here. So I'm going to go to throttle. I'm going to turn it on, and it gives you all these features. So I'm going to make this 5 adjustable, so you can have 5 different R modes. And the only 2 that I'm going to turn on is I want to be able, everything's off. So you can, this is the menu where you can control what R mode can control. Like what are the features that it has. And there's a reason for this. I'll show you when we get into R modes. So I'm going to turn on dual rate, and I'm going to turn on speed. These are the 2 that I want active. I don't want to change the curve with an R mode. I don't want to change the trim with an R mode. The delay I've never used. So there's other features with the R mode that actually not on this one. So those are the only 2 I turn on. Now if we go back, now when I push this button over in the corner, you can see it go through the R modes. So you'll be able to see that R mode is active. So next step of this is I'm going to create a custom menu. This menu allows me to put all of my features that I want to change for power under one menu so you can see them all. The reason why I do this is if I get a good run or I want to communicate my tune with somebody else, I can take a picture of it in one screen capture and send it to somebody or keep it in my archive so I know that that tune worked really well and make some notes. And I do that all the time. I have a bunch of these pictures of these menus with different tunes. So I'm going to generate the custom menu. So if we start from the main menu, I'm going to go to System. I'm going to go to Custom List. Now, normally the first box designates the steering, the second, it's the channels. The second box is throttle, the third is aux 1, the fourth is aux 2. But it's not defined, you don't have to have it this way. So what I found is the easiest way is on the box 1, that's the default, the furthest left that's activated now. I'm going to change this stuff to throttle. So you can see when I move up or down, I can put a throttle feature on it. And when I do that, that little R shows up. So that means that this function is R mode changeable per R mode. So the first one that I have on the menu is your dual rate, your high setting. Your second one that I usually use is, let's see here. Oops, hang on. I do speed. And you can see that one is also R mode adjustable. Next one I'll do, you go to throttle, I'll go speed, and I'll go point. So that's your initial throttle hit. I'll go over that in a second. Then the last one, I'll change to throttle. This one's going to be curve. Rate, I believe. Yeah, rate. And on this one, what's odd is you can have a curve for the brake and a curve for the throttle. So if it reads, if you do a number on it and it reads, it toggles between, like, you know, you set it at 20 and then it goes back to 0. It's because it's reading the brake. So if you give it a little bit of throttle, you'll see it come back to your throttle curve. So those are the main power functions that I use. And then the last one I'll do is like a lot of times I'll put the brake on here. So if I do, let's see here. I think I can do the brake like this, rate brake. So then I can change the dual rate on the, I think that's right. Pretty sure that's right. So that's the setup that I usually do for the Expo Curve, kind of the basic throttle settings. So now if we go back to the main menu and I go to Custom, now I have all of my settings, all of my power settings in one menu. And I'll explain what each one of these do. So dual rate is how much total power you're going to have. And I'll usually adjust this. I'm going to do a setup like for a 2.0, and I'll also do a setup for a 2.5, and this is a Tekin RX8 type setup. So normally, if I was going to start out on a road that I don't know of, how much traction, I'll put it at about 70%. The speed number, this is your ramp. And I'm going to go over these on the whiteboard here in a second, but I'll set them up so you can see them, and then I'll explain what they do. So the speed numbers, the only speed numbers that I use with a lot of power are -97, -96, and -95. Those cover the rates that I want, the ramps that I want, depending on the power. So I'll do, with the 2.0 motor and the curve, like the way this is set up, I usually go a -96. And then, so the next number down is the point. The point number is how hard do you want it to hit out of the hole? So it's instant power. It's not involved with the speed forward number, the -96. And a good starting point, usually what I tell people, is start out about between 20 to 30, depending on what speed control you're running. That gets a little complicated because you can adjust instant throttle and curves in your speed control. So when we go to the graph, I'll kind of show you some settings on the whiteboard and what it does with the speed control. But for my settings on the speed control, I usually start out about 25. The curve rate, again, I'll explain this on the whiteboard, but just so we have it set up here, a good starting point is usually about 20 to 25. And what this does is it curves the speed ramp. Instead of a linear ramp, it puts a little curve in it. And that's an important number. The difference between, if you've heard of a point style tune and a curve style tune, this is the simple way to tune where it's one number curve. And it's a very important number. So, and the last number that I have down here is brake, and I usually set this brake. I set it 100% in the speed control, and I might dial this down to like 65 or 70 depending, right? So you don't have full brake. So that's a standard setup that I'd run, and I'm gonna show you what this does. So let me draw a little, I'm gonna draw for a second here. So if we have this is going to be time, and this is going to be power, or EPA or dual rate, whatever you want to call it, right? This is how much throttle you're going to give it, is how high it is in the graph. So this initial number, there's a number that isn't a part of the radio. And let's say on my Tekin, I normally set it up where I either hit between 15 or 20% throttle instantly. That means 1% throttle pull. At 1%, it's putting 20%, I think I have mine set at 20 right now. It's putting 20% throttle in. So this is not adjustable by the radio. That's your ESC instant throttle. 1% throttle. Okay, so that is adjustable in the software, and I'm usually between 15 to 20. So at 15, let's say we're using 15. I put my point number at, what did I put it on? 25. So it's going to go up another 25% when you instantly hit the throttle. So this is the instant throttle pull right here. So now we have the combination of both power. You have the ESC 1% throttle and the point. So this is point. I'm going to try and draw this as simple as I can, but it's going to get a little crazy. So I'll do this as clear as I can. Okay, so this is the point value. So both of these combined are how hard the car hits on the start. And the reason why this number, the 15 to 20, exists is two reasons. You don't want in your range of adjustment a range of throttle that you'll never turn down to. I'll never launch at under 15% throttle. So I take it out of the equation by making 1% of the throttle pull 15%. So now I have more adjustment in the radio because I'm eliminating the first 15% of throttle pull being always on. It's now adjusting to where my radio controls 85% of the throttle instead of 100. So it spreads it out over a longer, it helps your resolution of the radio by doing that. So that's the explanation of point, is it's how hard it hits. Now, the next thing that happens is the speed. When you pull the trigger, this ramp goes up. And this speed is the negative, I have it set at negative 96 right now. So that's the negative 96 number. Okay, so this is how fast that power comes in. 95 would look like that. 97 would look like that. Oops, hold on, I'm backwards, sorry. Okay, 97 and 95. Is that right? No, dang it, I was right. I'm getting confused here, hang on. This is getting ridiculous. Hang on, let me redraw this. I might actually do this a different color. So to amplify this, let's say this is 95, this is 97. Okay, so if you the lower the negative number, you know, if it's 95, that ramps really fast. 96 ramps slower, 97 ramps even slower. And when I mapped out 97, it goes a little past the end of the track. And here's how I mapped it out. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. The point number, I'm able to map out how far 97 goes, which is kind of cool. So, okay, so we have the speed number, whether it's 95, 96, or 97, how fast it ramps the rest of the power in. Then when it reaches full throttle, it levels off, right? So when it reaches the maximum dual rate you have, it's here. This is at 70% right now. So it just holds that dual rate for the rest of the run. It holds that percentage power. This is a basic run where it's at 15 on the point, I'm at negative 96, and it ramps the rest of it all the way in, and then it stops when it gets to 70% and runs to the end of the track. The other number that we have to deal with is curve. So the curve number in a positive 25 will make this linear power gain go like this. So this is negative, or this is 20, I have it at 25 right now. Okay, so the bigger this number, put this up here. Oof, getting crazy with the, hold on a second. Okay, the bigger this number, the more power it moves to the beginning of the run. And the best way to explain it is, if you have a negative 96 ramp, this power is always going to be in at this point. That point could be just after half track. How it gets there is determined by this ramp. So if I were running the car and it spun the tires in the beginning of the run, but the launch looked okay, I would lower this number because it's going to take more power out of the beginning and put it in the end. And if you raise this number to like a 30 or a 35, this curve gets bigger and it puts more power in quicker. This curve gets taller. So I can move power along this ramp to more of the beginning of the run or more of the end of the run, depending on how big or small this number is. It's an important tuning feature because the actual power curve should look something, it should have an arc to it like what this black line does. You put in a lot of power, you reach maximum G-force or pull, and then it continues slowly at the end. So this is the bass tune that works extremely well. This is like 95% of the M17. And this is R mode 1. This isn't, this is without shifting. There's two things that I do when I shift. I either up this number to like 72. Now with the 2.0 motor, the shift is very slight because the motor makes brutal power. You shift it more than 2 or 3% and it spins usually. So that shift number, when it shifts, moves this entire green line up. So now if you were to remap, this whole map would be 2% taller, roughly. It's a function of the percentage, but it's gonna move this whole map up where it might be here now. It's 2% higher. You can use that. The value of this is when I go run my car and I think I got the tune right, I will shift to another 2% on a test run to see if it makes a difference. If it does, I'm not on the edge of the tire. So I'll look at the mile an hour or I'll look at the ET, and it should make a certain difference. That usually, a 2% shift will usually make a couple miles an hour and a half a tenth at the max, but I should be able to see it in the run. If I shift and see it, I know there's more in the car. If I shift and I don't see a difference, that means that the tire is starting to spin and there's not much more left. I'm right on the edge. And I'll usually back it down to where I see the car slow down a little. So then I know that the tire is solid, and I'll keep the shift in the car in case I need it. But that shift, that test is a valuable test to know how close you are to the edge of the tire and if it can do more. And there's a process in trying to get this curve correct for the track. And I'll run a 70%, 25, 25, so point and curve, and run the car. And then if the car puts everything down, I keep upping the dual rate, this number, till it doesn't put it down, and look at where it fails. Did it fail in the mid-track? Did it fail in the beginning? Did it fail somewhere in here that I can move the power, right, with the curve and get it to put everything down? Sometimes, you know, it might spin right here, so I'll move, hang on. I'll move more of my power towards the beginning and see if I can get all the power in by this point. And if I can, if I figure out the right curve for the road and get all the power in at this point, then I'll move the point up and see where it fails again, right? And it's this constant kind of evolution of your tune for that road. So every time I run, I try and get it to the end of the track where I can look at the data and improve my tune. If it spins or crashes, I don't get the data that I need to improve my tune. So I err on the weak side of the tune to make sure it goes down, and I can run it again and get a difference of the two runs. It's an important evolution of your tune to not crash so that you get the data. So the other thing that I can do, this 2% shift is a real normal thing that I do in testing, and I keep that shift when I compete in the race. In case I'm losing, I'll shift at 2% and have a pretty good feeling that it's gonna move, it's gonna put the power down. The second thing that I do is I will change the ramp. So the problem with the first shift changing the ramp is if you shift right here, it could ramp all this power in very fast, and it's too big of a number. It's too big of a power increase if you use it as your first shift. But if I use it as my second shift, as kind of my Hail Mary, and I shift it way out here because I'm losing, or I think the car can take more power, the difference in power of the ramp increase is almost nothing. So I'll usually up the EPA again a couple. I'll do a 74 or 75 in this case, right? And I'll change the dual rate, or I'm sorry, the R mode ramp to a 95. So those are really the two things that I adjust in R modes to increase the shift, either a dual rate change or a ramp change. And very small changes. If your car, when you shift, comes unglued, it's too big of a shift. You shouldn't upset your car in the shift. It should be very smooth. And sometimes at this 2% shift, I can't even hear the difference. I can only see it in the times. So the car will be faster if your shifts are very mellow. You upset the car enough where you can see it or hear it, and you're not getting the full benefit of the shift. So to add those R mode values in the radio, let me get the radio back here. All I'll do is, it says R on the R1, right? And these R's are what can be changed. So I'll go to, let's say I'm going to change the dual rate. I will go to the dual rate and click R mode 2. And I think I'll have to set all these settings. So I'll lower this one down to 72. The speed forward is -96. Sorry, this takes a second. The point was at 25. Notice the curve is already set at 25. One of the reasons why you don't want things R mode adjustable is you don't want to have to set each value independently, like your trim or curve or something that you don't want to change per R mode, right? You don't want to shift and have your steering trim change or something. So just the two items that I changed in the R mode setting are the only ones you really want to do. So now when you look, this one is set, I think that's correct, where everything's at 25. Let me change the brake too, just so it doesn't distract anybody. Okay, so now when you look at R mode 1, I have it at 70% dual rate, and when I click the button to R mode 2, it changes to 72%. You can do the same thing with anything set on the R. When you make the R mode changeable, it changes the point and the forward. Like this, I don't really want an R mode on, but to have the next one up have an R mode, I gotta have that one active also. So I would always try and keep the points on your R modes the same. I don't think it matters, but just to keep things uniform, keep everything the same in the R modes that you don't want to change. So you could even go this and go, okay, I want to speed this up to a 95. So now my shift, when I go back to the original one, I have a 70% dual rate and a negative 96 ramp. When I click up to 2, now it's at 72% and a negative 95 ramp. So, and you have the ability to do this, let me change that back, 5 times. So you have 3, you have 4, and you have 5. The 5th one, I always keep at 100% to do your calibration on your ESC. You don't want to calibrate your ESC unless everything is set, your brake and your throttle is set to 100%. So I usually keep the 5th one normal. And I did forget to tell one thing. This is a very important point of the ramps, is when you go into the settings and you go to your speed, make sure to do this because this activates your ramp. I should have went through this earlier. So when I click on this, it shows, now this is the stock menu, it shows that my forward is at negative 96. It shows that my point is at 25, so it's instantly 25. This in needs to be changed to out. What that does is when I pull the trigger, you can see the activation on the bottom, is it'll instantly go 25% and then smooth the rest of the way, right? So that's what your servo's doing. When it defaults to in, it puts that smoothness on the back end of it. See how it's not gonna run through the curve. So you wanna make sure, this is one of the mistakes I've seen a lot, that in-out thing is set to out, and you gotta set that on every R mode. So I'll go to R mode 2, set it to out, 3, set it to out, 4, let me just set them all, so, and 5. That way that when I go back to R1, you can see the servo movement that's working. It's an instant hit and then ramp in. Okay. So the other kind of cool thing about the custom menu in the M17 is I'm going to turn this off. And when I turn it back on, when you grab your radio, it comes onto the main screen. You can double hit this solid button or solid dot and it goes to your main screen. So you don't have to scroll through menus. Everything's in one spot. I think this is the coolest feature of the M17. So that's a pretty good example of what the standard curve, Expo Curve tune is. Make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, I'm gonna erase this. So the next tune it's a lot more complicated, and I don't know if it's any better. I've been running it for the last month or two. It's a P number tune, and In Vegas, Taylor Spencer had an Expo Curve tune that was awesome. I think it was better than my tune, and he won the event with an Expo Curve. So there is such a thing as being too complex when it comes to a tune. So I'm going to show you guys this and how I do it, but I don't know which one's better. And I think a lot of times for simplicity and ease of adjusting the tune, the Expo Curve works extremely well. And the only application I think this works for is very high power outlaw applications. I don't think the P number application is good for like a 13.5 type system or a lower turn motor like a 4.5 or a 5.5, because you ramp in so fast, you don't need the resolution of all these P numbers to adjust. So this application works best with like a 3.0 or bigger motor where you're going to ramp in power pretty much all the way down the track. So I'll show you on the radio first how we change this. So how I do the P number stuff, think about the best way to do this. I go back to System, Custom Menu. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a new menu with this stuff. So I need to, yeah. So now I'm on the, if we look at the, you have 4 different menus you can scroll through. The first one is the curve. I'm going to make another one. So the second one, I'm going to do a P number tune. So I already have the dual rate set there. This one I need speed. I need point on this. So all these apply. So this is where it changes. So on this one, I'm going to do curve. And what I need to do to get the right menu, it won't allow me to select a point. So I got to go back into the settings and go to the curve, throttle, and I'm going to change this to P numbers, so curve. And you can see this menu is your P numbers, so it allows you to do a complex curve instead of just a Expo Curve. And there's 9 numbers, so you can see as I move down these numbers, that yellow arrow or that yellow crosshair moves to the different percentage that it is. Right now, 1 equals 10%, 3 equals 30%, right? It's a linear, there's no curve there. So now that it's set on curve, I can go back to my custom menu, my second menu, and you can see P1 is at 10. Hang on one second, sorry, I scroll through this so fast. I'm gonna go to my system. I'm going to finish setting up my menu here. So the custom list. Okay, so now this one turns into P1 because now it's set on the P numbers. I'm going to set this one to P2. Oop, hang on. Getting click happy here. And I'll run all of these P numbers. So curve, P3. Then I'll go to the next menu and I'll set all of these up to do the rest of the P numbers. I miss it? Hold on. Here we go. Speed, curve. So this will be P4. You get the idea of what I'm doing here. P5. Let me get through all 9 of them and then we can start tuning. Come on. Okay, so that's all the P numbers. Then the other thing that's kind of cool is you can go to the last one, and I can just shut this menu off so it doesn't have an option. Just you don't have to scroll through this menu. So if you just turn all these off, it won't give you the option when you go and actually go into the menu to select this. It'll save you a little time if you're scrolling through. Okay, so those now the last menu, the fourth menu, is just blank. So now your custom list should be all set up. So if I, there's one other thing that I want to do here. Hang on. Let me change this. This is, if I go into the system one more time, I need to be able to select if it's a curve or a P number by the custom menu, and then I won't need to go into these menus anymore. So if we go custom list and I go to the first one, I'm going to use this blank one down here. And I'm going to do the curve type there. And I'll show you why. Okay, so if I go to the first number, right now it's on curve. If I change this to Expo, that's where this number works. That's where this menu works, right? This is the standard Expo curve, and I can put that at 25, let's say, right? If I want to do that tune. If I want to do a different tune, the point number tune, I'm not sure whether this number references the P numbers or not. I don't think it does, but just to be safe, I'll put that at 0. And I'll change this to the curve. You can see that the curve changed to P1, right? So it's changing the menu, but I don't want to use P1 here. So I'll change this to curve. And then when I go to my next menu, now I'm going to use the second and third menu, right? Because it's got the P numbers set. And right now there's 0 curve. So the complexity is it splits the run up into 9 runs. And so when I use the P number, I will usually run 97. And I'll show you why. So that's how you set up the menu. How you tune it is what I'll show you on the graph. So you have P1, 2, 3, then the next square you have P4 through P9. So you have all your settings. One thing I would advise is as you tune these and change these numbers, go to your original menu, your settings menu, go to your curve. And when we look at this as a throttle, as a P number, and let's say I change the second one to 30, let's say. And I think this is pretty close. Every tune's going to be different per car. You can see the throttle curve change down in this window down here. This one's the brake. You'll never need to mess with that. You'll see your curve in this window. It's pretty small, but there's a lot of information in that little window. So let's say I do P1 at 20 and go P2 at like 35 and P3 at maybe 50. You can start building a curve of what your throttle will look like. And it doesn't have to be an Expo curve. It can be anything you want. And there's a couple different basic curves that I use. I'll explain to you. So if we did 60 and then let's say we do that. Just make a real basic tune in here. I'm doing this to prove a point here. I'll show you in a second. There's my tune, right? But it's got a wave in it or a bump, right? So a car doesn't like an aggressive hit. Whatever you set your P numbers at, try to make sure that everything runs smooth. So I would up this number to make sure that it's a smooth curve like that, right? Where it looks normal. The only aggressive part of the tune that kind of works is the very beginning, the launch. But the cool thing of this is, so you get the idea of what the P numbers do. the first part of my tune when I started doing P numbers is I mapped out what P numbers, where they were in the run, and I'll show you how I did it. So let's say you had your run, and I set, if we have, that pen's not looking bad. Yeah, let me get a different one. So if we have the run, and you got P1 through P9, and it's a section, right? I would adjust P1 to like 60%, let's say, or, you know, that first number is usually in the 20% range, and then P2 might be 35, let's say, right? So you have this curve that's starting to be generated. I would shut P3 through P9 off to like 10%. So that's what my curve would look like. And run the car and watch it launch and see what the car did, and note where the car shut off so that I could see down the track, where does P2 end? And when I get these two numbers that looks good, I would do a P3, right? And watch where that shut off down the track, and then a P4, and watch where that point shut off, and map out which P numbers shut off at certain stages of the track, and figure out. So I kind of figured out that negative 97 with between a 15 to 20% throttle pull on your ESC, the last P9 number crosses the finish line, like it's your end power, and it goes a little beyond the end power. So that gives you a ramp all the way down the track. And I don't really change the 97 number. I want that adjustability all the way down. The cool thing about the P number, the positive is a long time ago I asked what is the optimum power curve, and I didn't ask it right because I don't think people understood what I was looking for. But I've done power curves now that look like this, and then I've done power curves that look like this. And I've done, and you get all these different, I can hit it really hard on the launch, and then P2 is an actual lower number, and then I ramp power in. I did a small hit, hard acceleration to full G, and then a ramp all the way down. I've done a harder hit, a pause, and then a ramp, right? So there's all these, when you focus on this area, the launch, there's multiple ways to control power in the launch, and every road, every tire, every chassis is slightly different. And what's kind of crazy is when I mapped out different cars, like the rear motor Bullet, the Silver Bullet, and the Apollo, the ramp, as I mapped, I did that same thing where I ran P1 and P2 and got it as good as I could get it. Then I add P3, get it as good as I could get it, P4, P5. It takes a long time to do, but once I generate these curves, all the cars look different. So it's interesting to see, like the rear motor car was like huge power, and then it kind of leveled off, and it didn't like a lot of power added towards the end, where the Silver Bullet was a smaller hit, but then I could ramp power in and it would mile an hour harder on the top end. This car didn't, the rear motor car didn't like it. And the Apollo, the Apollo is different. It's pretty close to Silver Bullet, but I think it can take more on the launch. And what I'm doing with the Apollo is almost like this. Like I'm ramping a ton of power in at the end to try and get, as I'm learning more and more about what cars are capable of, I'm starting to ramp more power in at the end. So you can get all these different complex curves, and you're not stuck to a, when you do the curve that's in the Expo, you're stuck, this is no Expo, and this is positive, and this is a little less positive, and this is, hold on. This is what the curves look like, or the features look like when you do the Expo curve, right? Where you got this, you got the same line, you got maybe a real small one, but you're stuck with these profiles. But with the P numbers, I could do anything I want with the curve and see what the car likes. The problem is it's so complex, sometimes you get lost where you change something and say, I want to add, let me erase this again. This is getting crazy, but so if you do a kind of a standard curve where you have the point and the point's high, and then you curve it up, and now my tune kind of looks like this, where I'm ramping power at the end really hard to try and get the mile an hour out of the car. But if I think I can launch harder and I run point 1, 2, and 3 a little bit more, and it doesn't like it, I got to remember what it was before, and I got to not only remember one number, I might have to remember 3. So I'll kind of do a base tune, or I have a base map, and then I'll start changing numbers around to see if I can get any more out of it. But I usually take a picture of what all my P numbers are so that I don't lose my tune. It's happened before where I had a really good tune, I changed something, and then I can't get it back because I didn't take a picture of it, or I can't remember how much I moved, whether it was a couple percent or what. So I'm not convinced that this style is a better style. It's infinitely adjustable, but there's so many numbers to deal with. It's borderline too complex. So I wanted to show you some of what's going on with the launch, or zoom in on the launch, because that's really where the P number thing has a lot of adjustability. So if we do P1, P2, and P3, what I'm assuming it does, and I assume this because when I change power levels on the dyno, it is a digital power change. So if I go from 20% to 40% to 60% on the dyno, I can hear the step in power. That's what it looks like. What I believe this is doing, because it's a smooth transition, is it's ramping to those points. So it's creating a smooth curve, I'm assuming. I don't know if that's definite, but the difference in digital steps on the dyno compared to the radio curve is noticeable in the sound. So I'm pretty confident it generates a ramp between the numbers, which is nice, because what that allows you to do is, if I have my P number, let's say this P number is at 20, and this is at 35, and this is at like 55, let's say. So I have 20, 35, and 55. You have a point number. So this curve, let's say, looks like, let me draw this right. Okay. Now, when I move my point number, you have a point number that usually is ranging between 10 to 25, right? So 10 is going to be here. 25 could be all the way up here. And it's not the same. Actually, 25 would be about here. So now when you hit the throttle, if I have it set at like 15, it's going to ramp all the way to that, cut this off, and go. So I can move my P number up and down this ramp more to get a different launch. And then if I change this number to like a 40 or a 50, that P number value changes. Now it might look like this instead. So if the P number, or if the point starts here, the launch is harder. So what you can start doing with that is some crazy stuff. Like if I want, and I tried this is kind of a cool tune. So if I go 50% power, a ton of power, and this goes back down to 30, so now this is reversed. This is just some ideas on how to use these tools to tune. I can't tell you how to tune your car, but I can tell you how the tools work so that you can experiment and figure out what works for your car. So this is kind of a cool one where I had the P number coming in at like 8%, so about here. So this thing starts out where let's say the P number, or the point number, is 20. Or I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here, hang on. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Let's say this point number is 8. And it comes in P1, this is equivalent to a point of 10, I'm assuming. I'm pretty sure it's close to that. You can experiment with this. But if I have a point of 8, and this P1 number is set at 50, and P2, let's say P2 is set at 10. So it's going to come in at 50%, just for a split second. Like you'll hear it just go pop real quick and then lower itself down to 10%. And I can adjust how long that a lot of that power comes in by the point. So if I lowered this to 6, now that power hits twice as long. So not only can I judge how hard the initial hit is, but I can judge how long it stays at that power level, and then either goes down or up. So I've messed with this, and in certain cars, like rear motor cars or tracks that have a ton of sauce right in the beginning, I'll nail it with a ton of power just for a split second to get the car moving, and then back it off and do a normal ramp. Tracks that don't have a lot of traction, this doesn't work well. But when you have massive traction coming out of the hole, sometimes this works well where it gets the car really moving, but the power jolt is so short that it doesn't upset the car. So some of the things you can do with the P number. The other type of tune that I've done in the launch, and the launch is everything, right? I mean, the launch is the foundation for your whole run. My standard P number tune is a point between like 6 to 10, let's say. So I'm falling within the P1 number power. And if this P1 number is 20, then I'm starting at 20% power plus whatever the ESC number is, right? So either 15 to 20% for the ESC. So that 1% throttle equals 15 to 20. That still applies to this also. So I might start at 20% on P1, and if it's at 6, it starts way back here. And if it's at 10, it starts ramping to whatever P2 is instantly. And if I want more power than that, if I go to 12 or 14, then it's whatever on this ramp, then you start running up this ramp and it increases your power. But you can have this shelf of power before it starts ramping up. So the point number and the first 2 or 3 P numbers act differently in the P number tune than the Curve, the Expo tune. And there's more adjustability with this. And I've spent hours and tried all sorts of different types of launches. So if you have the time to spend on tuning, and it's kind of interesting to see what your car does, you can mess with these numbers. And I hope I explained this right, because there's a lot going on with it. But there's a lot of adjustability in how the car launches based on P number. Last thing I'll say about the P number is the ESC number is important because I found that between 15 to 20% equals 1%, that ramp goes to the end. And if you increase this number or increase the point, like the starting point, to 40 or 50%, the ramp speed is always the same slope. But if your slope starts here, like let's say your point number is really high, you only have to ramp this much information or that much time in. If you start it way down here, you got to ramp this much time in. So to try and get the ramp to go all the way to the end, it just doesn't always go to the end or stop at the same point. When you change your initial power setting or how far you start up this ramp, it changes the speed of the ramp. So I found that 97 and either a 15 or 20% ESC setting for instant throttle puts that ramp really close to the end. And you can test it by taking P9 and shutting it off, and then run your car and see where it stops. And it should stop really close to the end. So I think that's about all I have for the P numbers. I'm trying to think if I forgot anything. The other powerful thing it does, one last thing, when you look at the end, and I mentioned this briefly before, but the limitation of the Curve tune. Let me erase this whole thing and I'll draw one more graph and I think I'm done. So recent discoveries of massive mile an hour, the normal curve tune starts out with your point hit, and then it kind of goes like this. And if the speed number stops here, let's say this is negative 96, this is flat, and I might shift at the end, right, to get a little bit more power. But the P number tune, and this works extremely well. This is what I've been doing for a long time with the Sanwa radio. The P number tune allows you to do a similar thing where I can adjust any one I want here, but what I can do is do a curve like this, but then I can go like this instead. So this is a smoother ramp at the end, and I can even, you know, do something like this where it's topped out, right? I mean, I can adjust the end of the run just like the beginning of the run, where the limitation of the curve is once you reach the end of your ramp, it's done. Now it's just a flat power. So there is some advantages to this, but it takes a long time to figure out. I just got some notes here, hang on. Okay, so I got a couple questions. One of them is, do you ever change your dual rate past 70%? And that's based on your motor. So I'll start out with a dual rate on a 2.0 at 70%, but I'll go as high as 85. Like I think when I ran this last weekend in Texas, I was at 85%. It was concrete, a lot of traction. So 85 is about it for dual rate on a 2.0. I'll go 95 dual rate on a 2.5. That seems like maximum power for both of those motors. The 3.0 and above, you can go 100%. And I'll even start moving the curve. Like if I were to map, what the difference in curve looks like from a 2.0 to a 2.5 to a 3.0. So my 2.0 curve might look like this, and this is where 97 is. And this is a 2.0. So I'm gonna ramp it and keep adding power all the way to the end, right? And this is a Tekin RX8, so no other timing besides the 30 degrees. A 2.5, this is negative 97, and it's at 85% dual rate. I'll do the same curve with a 2.5 at a negative 97 with the point number, but I'll run 95%. And the performance of it is really close. Like I'll have more, actually, I should take that back. So the 2.0 will make more power, but the tune of a 2.5, the tune is usually really close to the same. It just falls off a little on the mile an hour in the end. It doesn't have the horsepower of the 2.0, but I can go all the way to 95% on the 2.5. Then the 3.0, 3.5, I'll start running curves that might look more like this. And the power stops, the ramp stops earlier, like a negative 95. And then everything else is flat, and the power gain is from the timing you add in the ESC over 30 degrees, right? If you run 50 or 60 degrees or whatever you run. So the last half of the track is based on how much timing you put in, where on the larger motors, it's ramping EPA or dual rate in all the way to the end. So that's the difference in the smaller motor tune compared to the larger motor tune. Another question is, when do I hit my shift switch? I usually will not hit it unless I'm losing, or if I'm testing to see if it's gonna stick it. And if I do hit it during testing, I'll hit it about halfway down when all the power's ramped in, so I can see under max G-force after the ramp is, like way up here, I got a good amount of power in it. I'll shift to see if I can get a little bit more in it. So I won't shift it in the very beginning. I'll let it go at least halfway down the track before I shift in testing to see if I can put any more power in it. The Expo tune, your dual rate is 70%. What is your EPA set at? So the question is, on your Expo tune, your dual rate is set at 70%. What is your EPA set at? 100%. Yes. So the EPA is always set at 100, and if I change any power, it's with dual rate. I leave my EPA set at 100. And when you calibrate the ESC, make sure your EPA for your brake and your throttle are set at 100%. I got a question of teach how to calibrate radio, and I would do that, but every ESC is slightly different. So with a Tekin, I'll hold the mode button down. It'll tone. The first beep, it's looking for neutral. When it tones again, you hit full throttle. When it tones again, you hit full brake. It tones again, you let off, it'll recalibrate and you're good to go. There's instructions for each ESC, so every ESC calibrates a little bit different. It's very important to calibrate your radio before you start any of it, or calibrate your radio to your ESC before you start any of this. I think that's about it. I don't know of any other major details that I use for tuning. I think I covered everything. If you got questions, please ask them either on this video or on the comments, or you can message me. The other question I got a lot before I get out of here is the M12 has the same software as the M17. I just don't know how the custom menu features work. It does have a custom menu, but I've never really set it up. I put most of my time into the M17. So, but the software will work the same with the P numbers and the, you know, all of the features of the software are the same. That as far as I know. I think that's it. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We had a lot of people on this one. I hope it helps you. I get a lot of radio tune questions, and this was probably the easiest way to answer all of them and show you guys how I tune with the M17. So hit me up with questions, and good luck at the track. Hope this helped out. Take care, everybody.